Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, where we're delighted to have addressing us Ailish Campbell on the subject, as you can see on the PowerPoint with all the details revealed. There we go. EU opportunities for Canada, reflections on a steadily deepening partnership. As I prefigured already, we are delighted to have Dr. Ailish Campbell, Ambassador of Canada to the EU, to address us. Let me just say a couple of additional things beyond announcing what you all could read on the screen anyway. We're very pleased to be doing this. For those of you who aren't familiar with the work of the C.D. Howe Institute, you may not know that the roots of the Institute, before it became the more multifaceted economic policy think tank that it is today, are in international economic relations. And it's very nice to get back to those roots. It's a cliche to say that Canada is a trading nation. Doesn't hurt to repeat it, though, because sometimes people forget. Here we are with one of the most important economic relationships. Let me just stop right there, because we all want to get on with the discussion. About Ailish herself, you will have seen her biography on the C.D. Howe Institute's website. Many of you, I know her personally or professionally. It doesn't say in her bio that she's a native of Hamilton, but one more reason to be proud of Steeltown. In addition to an impressive academic series of accomplishments, she has also had an unusually wide range of experience within the federal public service, in addition to her role representing Canada abroad. So as you'll see, if you were looking at the bio, including the Privy Council Office, Industry Canada, and Finance Canada, and we at the C.D. Howe Institute had the benefit of her participation in our International Economic Policy Council while she was in the public service, also at the Business Council of Canada. And so a very impressive set of experiences and credentials. Ailish, I hope that's a suitable kickoff to bring you to the front of the room. The last thing I'll just mention before you get started is that we are on the record. I mentioned that because many C.D. Howe Institute events, including ones that Ailish has spoken at previously, are off the record, but because we're doing this virtually, which lets us overcome all kinds of barriers of geography and time zones to some extent, it also just makes sense to do this on the record rather than trying to police everyone virtually. So please be advised. And Ailish, really great to welcome you back to the C.D. Howe Institute stage. Thanks for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Bill. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Good. Well, first of all, some things don't change. I loved your intro, really appreciated, about Canada is a trading nation. That doesn't change. But what does change, or what has changed, at least for me, is I am now elderly and have to wear glasses when I do speeches. So let me put those on, and I'll say a few words. I think I have about 20 minutes of a really comprehensive overview, and I hope some really useful geopolitical framing, and then some conversation about the structure and architecture of the relationship, and of course our economic and broader partnership. And then I'm really looking forward, most of all, to the Q&A. So let me get started. Thank you again so much, Bill, for that kind introduction and the opportunity to speak today. And the C.D. Howe has been just such a fantastic supporter of the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement from the start. So I want to thank as well your board and all of your members. Bill, you yourself co-authored one or two commentaries, I recall, back in 2013, urging trade negotiators to pick up the pace and move quickly to conclusion, which Canada did. And we finished that agreement in September 2014. After a process of it coming into force, CETA is now in its 7th year of provisional application, creating a platform for innovation and business with the 27 member states of the EU and the single European market of almost 450 million citizens. I'll come more to the numbers later, but if I might foreshadow a little, the results for exporters, consumers, and Canadians are enormously positive, both at a macro level and a micro level for many Canadian firms. And of course, many of you are online today, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. The political relationship has never been better, in part because of an architecture we did on the side of the trade agreement, or really in parallel to it. And that was the Strategic Partnership Agreement, or SPA, which was signed at the same time as CETA. And if there's one, or two main takeaways for your audience today, it's that I really encourage us not just to think about CETA, but also about this Strategic Partnership Agreement, a treaty signed at the same time that provides a mechanism to further deepen and broaden cooperation between Canada and the EU on a very wide range of issues. And that includes peace and security, clean energy, including LNG and hydrogen, climate change, sustainable development. Together, the CETA and the SPA have fostered intensified engagement between Canada and the EU, with over 50 structured dialogues covering the breadth of our economic and security relationship. Prime Minister Trudeau and Presidents von der Leyen and Michel highlighted these two agreements and the fundamental role they play in our relationship at our summit in November in St. John's, Newfoundland last year. And I'm happy to answer in the Q&A why there are not just one, not just two, but three different presidents we talk about here in Brussels: the President of the European Commission, the President of the Council that chairs the member states in their leadership formation of all the heads of state, and the President of the European Parliament. This steadily deepening partnership that I referred to in the title for this event is taken directly from that leader's statement, and it's a very good way to describe my experience the last 3 years as ambassador. We've added new partnerships and dialogues with the EU, ones on strategic raw materials, ones on digital cooperation, a green alliance, economic security, and our recent association to Horizon Europe, an innovation partnership. So before I get to the substance of what I wanted to share with you today, let me just give the ending away. The Canada-EU relationship has become a very strong demonstration of effective international collaboration, and one that continues to make an important contribution to addressing the global challenges of today and into the future. This relationship exists alongside a very strong bilateral relationship with the 27 member states of the EU and Canada's membership in NATO. We are stronger when we work together, as I experienced during the COVID crisis, when we imported mRNA vaccines from supply chains that originated in Spain, in Belgium, as well as elements from Switzerland and elsewhere. And we continue to see it in our steadfast response to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And we will continue to see more of it as we work together to make a clean energy transition for the world and address climate change. I want to just take us back here a little bit in terms of the framing where we've come from since we signed CETA. And of course, the EU of 2024 is not the same one that we signed the agreement with. There's one less member state due to Brexit. And beside the continuing effects of COVID, the energy security of EU member states has also been severely affected by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. These twin crises have strengthened EU unity, and of course, having to come off of and severely reduce Russian oil and gas provisions, that has also resulted in a massive price shock, inflation, as well as an importing opportunity for energy producers. We experienced an unbelievable level of inflation, I think, that hadn't been anticipated. We thought COVID was enough. An initial attack of Russia in Crimea, but then in 2022, this incredible shock, really, of war, full-scale war on the European continent. Because of the inflation-related shocks, the ECB embarked on an unprecedented tightening cycle, raising its key policy rate 10 consecutive times to an all-time high since the euro was introduced in 2000. I also want to flag that the level of investment by European companies into China and their profits derived from these investments has also put EU decision makers in a challenging position as they move to implement their open strategic economy approach The open strategic economy approach alongside an economic security lens is something we can talk about more in the Q&A. But the net of this is that the Commission, the European Commission, has added several new economic security and trade defense tools that have only also come online in the last 2 years. These are reflected in the Foreign Subsidies Regulation, the Anti-Coercion Instrument, and an FDI, Foreign Direct Investment Screening Regulation, as well as an International Procurement Instrument. And some of these tools are about increasing the toolkit to help address concerns about non-market economies, and in specific cases, they are about addressing China's trade practices. And to note, in the first investigation has now been held under the Foreign Subsidies Regulation, which started last month. Finally, elections for the European Parliament are something that doesn't come around that often, but will occur in June this year. It's a major year around the world, as we know, for elections. The centrist pro-EU political groups are expected to remain in the majority according to current polls, but the current elections are also expected to bring in more center-right, right-wing parties, and we want to see how that is going to affect decision-making amongst the EU member states, where also there are a very high level of coalition governments that are in some cases, like Germany, across the political spectrum in something called the Traffic Light Coalition, that is leading today. A new European Commission leadership will be selected over the summer and the fall, as I noted, and should take office in about October or November 2024. Europeans are also looking at the upcoming US elections with uncertainty about what also that may mean for European security and relations with the US. So with these major political shifts ahead, in that context, the EU will look to Canada as a key partner and as a beacon of consistency and reliability in their transatlantic relationship. I want to now move to providing some detail on how Canada and the EU work together, including security and defense, and then move on to trade. So first, our geostrategic partnership. Here I'd like to start by noting that for the third year in a row, the German Marshall Fund's Transatlantic Trends Survey, which is based on input from more than 14 countries in Europe, found that Canada is amongst the EU's most trusted partners. Over 70% of respondents considered Canada as a reliable partner, reflecting our stability and consistency. Reliability is a key asset in this age of shifting geopolitical currents and efforts to make the important transformations required to ensure economic resilience, to safeguard economic security, and to reach our shared target of net zero emissions by 2050. NATO remains the primary avenue for Canada's defense cooperation and engagement on the continent, and the cornerstone of its collective defense, in particular for the 23 member states who are also our NATO allies. Canada also values its security and defense cooperation with the European Union, including strong cooperation in its common security and defense policy, civilian and military missions, where Canada has partnered with the EU since 2003. And we also partner together on fighting foreign interference in the context of the work of the G7 Rapid Response Mechanism. We will continue our efforts to address disinformation, both in our bilateral work with the EU and in the G7, and ensure that our elections are not adversely impacted, that we share lessons and protect our democratic practices and integrity. I just want to flag that I think first and foremost for me as ambassador here, the piece of work that I'm very focused on is, of course, our cooperation to maintain pressure on Russia to end its illegal war on Ukraine. First and foremost, by adopting unprecedented sanctions on Russia that aim to undermine its ability to continue to wage war and those who support it. This has included sweeping sectoral and financial measures, hundreds of individual sanctions, export controls, work on circumvention of those export controls in third countries, and our continued work on the oil price cap in the context of the G7. Our alignment with the EU, the USA, the UK, Japan, and others on sanctions and growing focus on enforcement and anti-circumvention has negatively impacted Russia's economy, and we will continue to do more, including looking at the benefits, the interest on frozen Russian assets, and those frozen assets themselves as potential funding for funding Ukraine reconstruction, again in the context of working with our partners. The EU is also doing its part to support the country, and they recently agreed to a 4-year, 50 billion euro Ukraine facility, which will provide the certainty of financial support to Ukraine in this budgetary cycle in the EU until 2027. The facility provides a mix of grants and loans, and the key message here is that the EU is absolutely doing its part. On our end, as our Prime Minister noted during his most recent visit to Kyiv in February 2024, our support for Ukraine and its people is unwavering. And we were pleased to sign the strategic security partnership with Ukraine with a commitment of 3 billion Canadian dollars in critical financing and military support. The bulk of this package, 2.4 billion, will go towards funding Ukraine's state budget. And there's a lot more I can say there about our macro financial assistance, which since February 2022 has amounted to over $7 billion. I think as well, very important to flag that we have trained almost 40,000 Ukraine military and security personnel since 2015 as part of Operation Unifier, and I've been honored to meet them as they've come through Brussels and have spoken with multiple European partners, including the new EU training mission for Ukraine and bilateral partners that joined us in Operation Unifier, including Poland. We know that the EU has also welcomed many fleeing the war, and currently EU member states are hosting over 4.3 million Ukrainians who have temporary protection here inside the EU, mostly women and children under the age of 18. And I think it's important that back home we also recognize the financial and social impact that entails. And again, I want to flag that our EU partners are doing their part. And we will continue to partner with the EU, the USA, and others every step of the way, and we will not waver. I want to talk about now trade and secure supply chains and the energy and climate aspects of our partnership with the EU. As I talked a little bit about earlier, our trade and economic partnership, the platform for that, the architecture, if you will, is underpinned by CETA. Canada-EU bilateral trade continues to hit record highs. The total value of bilateral goods trade in 2023 reached 126 billion Canadian dollars, an increase of over 65% over pre-CETA levels in 2016. Total bilateral services trade is also up significantly, as is the level of investment, two-way investment between our two economies. Known stock of investment in Canada by EU national companies were estimated to be worth over 300 billion in 2022, up almost 45% since 2016, and representing almost 25% of global FDI in Canada. And as many studies by C.D. Howe have shown, FDI is the rails on which trade in both goods and services travel. Similarly, the stock of Canadian company investments in the EU was 248 billion in 2022, up over 46% since 2016, and representing 12.5% of Canada's total outward FDI stock. CETA continues to reduce the barriers and system frictions and facilitates the highly skilled workers who want to come in and out of our economies, investors, and business visitors in support of a broad range of trade-related and investment-related activities, as well as in innovation. But our relationship is about more than just numbers. I'd also like to stress that CETA's value goes far beyond the numbers. CETA makes it easier to expand and diversify trade, not only what is traded, but also who trades and with whom. As an inclusive trade agreement, CETA ensures that its benefits are shared as widely as possible, including importantly with companies owned by women, Indigenous peoples, and other underrepresented groups. And it was my absolute honor to host Chief Terry Paul, Chief of the Member 2 First Nation, and also the Chair of Clearwater Seafoods here for the first Canada Day event that we had in quite some time post-COVID, who of course represented his Indigenous-owned Canadian seafood company brilliantly here. We've seen seafood exports, including lobster, up since CETA. And there is also small businesses that are benefiting. We can talk about this more. I'm interested in hearing from those that are on the line. One of those is Ever Technologies from Calgary, who I was thrilled to see cut the ribbon in their facility, their geothermal technology facility in Bavaria. Their unique closed-loop technology repurposes drilling techniques from the oil and gas sector to produce geothermal energy that is scalable, continuous, and emissions-free. With the support of an over 90 million euro grant from the European Innovation Fund, almost 135 million Canadian, the result of this project is expected to translate into heat for 20,000 households in Germany and save approximately 44,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalents per year. It's just one of the many examples of how we're cooperating on the energy transition. We've also been very successful in leveraging the strategic partnership on raw materials to begin to build secure, affordable, and sustainable critical mineral and electric battery value chains. Canada and the EU just held the latest raw materials dialogue with senior officials on the margins of the PDAC mining conference this past week in Toronto. Maybe some of you were there. The main takeaway was the high ambition to work together both on specific projects in Canada and the EU and on broader strategic challenges, such as how to de-risk investments so that we can secure the reliable supply of the critical raw materials needed for the energy transition. This partnership has also resulted in billions of dollars and euros in investments on both sides of the Atlantic and in Canada by firms including Volkswagen, Sweden's Northvolt, Canada's Li-Cycle going here into the EU, and Rocktech Lithium, and many more. With these significant renewable energy resources, battery technology, and critical raw materials partnerships, Canada will remain a key partner for the EU in ensuring its sustainable supply chains and future growth. The EU is also a critical science, technology, and innovation partner for us. We have a long history of close cooperation dating from 1959 when the European Union innovation programs first launched. Our strategic partnership relies on a commitment to open science, the principles of scientific integrity, and to developing and using science and tech in a way that supports our shared democratic values and human rights. We're active participants in the EU's two largest R&D programs, Eureka, where Canada became a full member in 2022, and as I noted, Horizon Europe, where Canadians are considered associate country participants to Pillar 2 projects that involve a budget of roughly 10 billion Canadian dollars per year. The Horizon Europe Association is a really big deal. It was one of the things I was most proud to see the leaders announce at our summit last November. In the previous Horizon Europe program, Canadian researchers were the third most active non-European nation behind the USA and China. Canadians were successful in 18% of the calls pursued, and that metric has since grown to 22% in this new program. Additional benefits of association to Horizon Europe mean that Canadian researchers will now be able to receive project grants directly from the European Commission. They will also be able to be a core partner of a consortia, in other words, groups of researchers who have complementary skills, and to host research in Canada. Alongside of this, I think another element of our summit that I was very engaged on was our common vision and continuing to work on the digital transition. For example, we signed the Canada-EU Digital Partnership. Minister Champagne and his European counterpart, Commissioner Thierry Breton, met on February 1st of this year to set priority areas under the digital partnership, and that includes artificial intelligence, quantum science, semiconductor supply chains, and public policy related to online platforms, secure international connectivity, and cybersecurity. We are also strong and deep partners in addressing climate action and environment and ocean protection globally. That's why the launch of the Canada-EU Green Alliance at our Leaders Summit last November is key. This alliance will further deepen our partnership on environmental protections, fighting the triple crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, and we will address deforestation globally. Canada and the EU both recognize the role of carbon pricing as a powerful and effective policy tool to reduce emissions and are working closely together to promote carbon pricing globally. To that end, Canada was pleased to welcome the EU as the newest partner in the Global Carbon Pricing Challenge, which was launched at COP26 in Glasgow. The challenge calls on countries to adopt carbon pricing as a central part of their climate strategies, with a collective goal of covering 60% of global emissions by 2030. We've also put forward strengthened approaches to pricing carbon while addressing the risks of carbon leakage in our respective climate plans. Last year, and I think this is another important policy innovation here in the EU that's important for folks back home in Canada, the EU adopted its Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, regulation. This imposes a carbon tariff which will be applied starting January 1, 2026 on certain imports to the EU in the following sectors: cement, iron and steel, aluminum, fertilizers, electricity generated in and imported from third countries, and hydrogen products. In the meantime, the EU is implementing a transitional period as of October 1, 2023. So it's already begun and requires EU importers to start reporting on the carbon emissions of those products they import from the list I mentioned above. The reports for the first reporting period from October to December 2023 are now due. And once CBAM is fully applied in 2026, CBAM carbon tariffs will correspond to the carbon price that would have been paid by EU producers under the EU Emissions Trading System, or EU ETS. This price will be calculated depending on the weekly average auction price of EU ETS allowances, expressed in euros per ton of CO2 equivalents emitted. Canada worked closely with the EU on their design of their regulations to ensure that all of Canada's carbon pricing systems are accounted for under CBAM's definition of carbon pricing. We wanted to ensure that the carbon price paid in Canada would be deducted under CBAM so that it is never paid twice for the same product. As the European Commission is working on various aspects of the implementation of CBAM, we will continue to work closely with the EU and with Canadian stakeholders to ensure that Canada's exports are not at any disadvantage once CBAM is fully in force compared to their equivalent products here in Europe. Finally, as we work to develop new policy expertise around emerging new issues, including cyber and digital issues, we continue to be in conversation with the EU on how to approach these new challenges, including things like deep fakes and online related disinformation. This will just give you a very brief overview as to, I think, it's the EU relationship and the important contributions we are collectively making to address global challenges now and into the future, including, as I noted, health, our work together on COVAX, the COVID vaccine, and currently on food insecurity, deforestation, and oceans protection, as well as broader economic security and physical security issues, including in the Arctic. I have to say, looking forward, that I can already tell economic security is going to be a driving framework for the next European Commission, coupled with its open strategic economy approach and the new policy tools already mentioned. The Commission is moving aggressively to strengthen the EU's resilience and implement a policy doctrine reflecting that security considerations extend well beyond the military. And one of the key pillars of that economic security agenda is partnership. And Canada is at the top of that list in terms of partners that the EU is looking to work with. And I'll just flag that last week's work at the WTO Ministerial Conference is yet another great example of how we will continue to partner together, not just bilaterally, but globally and in the multilateral system. Canada and the EU's common beliefs in the core values of human rights, democracy, gender equality, diversity and inclusion, and the rule of law, as well as the rules-based international order, are absolutely not abstract comments here, especially given the war in Ukraine, and continue to provide a very strong foundation for our continued collaboration. So thanks, Bill, and to everyone at the C.D. Howe Institute for the invitation to speak on the importance of this steadily deepening Canada-EU partnership, and for your time. And I'm really looking forward to our Q&A session. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. You mentioned system friction, a phrase I've associated with Sylvia Austri, and the list of things that are under discussion or relevant to the relationship really does testify to the amazing amount of work that's necessary to keep us aligned. For you talked about needing glasses. We'll blame it on COVID. I'm the same, and that makes me old enough to remember when trips and trims were kind of a new thing. It's now the number of dimensions to the relationship is a great deal greater now. I must, in sort of impresario or MC mode here, draw everyone's attention to the 3-dot menu at the bottom right of your screen. I think Addie is about to put up the instructions. So please do hit that 3-dot menu to bring up your Q&A screen if you would like to ask a question. If you chat it, I may or may not see it because I have a few screens open, as I'm sure many of you do as well. It's better if you can do it through the Q&A feature, and we'll take more or less in the order they come in, but I do reserve the right to kind of roll a few things together if it appears helpful to make sure that we get through everything in time. So Ailish, I'll kick us off with something that you mentioned only a bit tangentially, but it's such a momentous thing. I wonder if I can just draw you out on it while everybody limbers up their keyboard tapping fingers. So Sweden joining NATO, that's creates more overlap. And you did highlight the importance of defense cooperation. Is that anything to note other than sort of a sign of the times, and maybe from the point of view of security, helpful for more European integration? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that. It's such a new and important development.
Yeah, what a great thing to flag, Bill, because I think first and foremost, Canada, was right out of the gate in terms of our support for Sweden and Finland's accession to the WTO. And of course, it's Ambassador David Angel that leads our representation here in Brussels at NATO. And I think I'll just highlight maybe three aspects of this. I mean, first and foremost, as you know, there's 24 members, I think, of NATO, 27 of the EU, and this just brings it into greater overlap. But of course, we have the benefit of having the UK in NATO. We have the US ourselves. NATO does not include EU members like Austria and Ireland. So it's not a perfect overlap, but certainly with Sweden and Finland joining, that kind of continued overlap, which again just provides an even deeper sense of the partnership, is to be welcomed. I think the second feature of that is of course that these are northern parts of the EU geography, and I think that makes us even stronger as we pursue aspects of our physical security, including in the Arctic, where we already had excellent cooperation, including with Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and of course through Denmark, our Greenlandic partners and others. So the USA. So that is an interesting piece of the geography, and we tend to see this relationship in a transatlantic perspective, Bill. And one of my jobs is to sometimes reframe that relationship and bring that perspective of the Arctic, which is why it's so important to have the participation of Canada's Indigenous people, including the Inuit, in our partnerships, and the incredible depth of relationships that they bring since time immemorial with the peoples who populate the Arctic. The other frame that I like to bring is, of course, the Pacific. And I'm always encouraging Europeans to visit Vancouver, because that's, I think, our Pacific and Indo-Pacific strategy is the part of Canada's identity and national interest that perhaps Europeans understand the least. And the third piece that I'll just mention is, of course, just bringing in more capabilities into NATO. Canada's operational presence as part of the Operation Forward presence in NATO is in Latvia. And I understand that Ambassador Angel is working on how Finland and Sweden will participate in some of those battle groups, including ours that we lead in Latvia. So that's very good on the strengthening of the partnership side. Does that answer your question?
Well, thank you. I know there was no particular answer I had in mind. It's just such a momentous thing.
It really is.
I wanted to lead off on that, and of course you focused on defense cooperation quite a bit. We have a question about the EUDR, and I'm wondering, is that about, maybe I'll just ask for clarification, because I don't recognize the name of the person who sent it in, to do with deforestation? Or is there something else? I may not have all my acronyms straight, so let's hold off on that one just for a moment. We have a question about CBAM, and it has to
Yeah.
do with the need to make sure Canadian exports are treated fairly. And
Yeah.
it's quite complicated. I admit to being very nervous when this stuff started to appear on the scene. I'm straying a bit from the question, but just protectionists are pretty good at seizing on anything. So perhaps if you don't mind taking us forward a little bit on that and seeing how it might affect, including other things, energy trade between Canada and the EU.
Yeah. I think, first and foremost, it is important to recognize that the EU, it is a very high standard, intensely regulated market. And Andrew Bradford has written a fantastic book called The Brussels Effect. So if anyone wants to dive into this, I highly recommend it. And it's really the amount of regulation, and I think we're starting to see a dialogue that I've certainly been trying to engender since I arrived as ambassador. And one of those is, to understand that Canada itself is a very, well regulated, um, high standard economy, and we need more mutual recognition of standards rather than assuming that highly advanced partners like Canada are just going to holus bolus adopt whatever the EU has promulgated. We have our own regulations. We're satisfied with them. They serve Canadian citizens very well, and that's also, I think, again, proof is sometimes in the numbers. We're also doing a really increased amount of trade with Asia after the signing of the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. And of course, we continue to do excellent business with our partners in the Americas, and first and foremost, of course, with the US and Mexico. So those, to my mind, the kind of interoperability is my objective, so that you have Canadian standards that at times, and for specific exporters, can reach EU standards, stay competitive with our primordial trading partner, which is the US. I sometimes hear from Europeans, about their concerns about competing with the US, and I say, yeah, try living next door. It's, we understand competitive pressure better than anyone. And again, I'll just come back to the fact that, it's part of my job to articulate, our way of doing business and our way of social protection, which of course extends to the entire set of issues that preoccupy citizens everywhere: uh, labor organization, health protection, health benefits, living and thriving wages, and all of that is part of the dialogue with the EU. Um, the protectionist impulse is absolutely real, and it's stronger in some sectors than others. And so we have to continue to work on the recognition of things like, for example, our own pan-Canadian carbon pricing system. At the beginning of the conversations on CBAM, the EU was so inward focused, and there's such an amount of focus here in Brussels on their partnership amongst the 27. And then the second circle is, of course, the European Economic Area. And you bring in partners, like Norway, that's not a member, but is a massive exporter to the EU. Switzerland, also not a member of the EU. And when you get into those configurations, and now you've got Brexit, the EU's got a complicated neighborhood. Let's not forget, we've got Ukraine, Turkey, and Africa, the Morocco, Libya, Tunisia, other partners, of course, in the Euromed, as they call it. Now Canada is further away, and it's my job to ensure that our interests continue to be articulated, and that has included a lot of incredibly hard work. And I want to recognize all of my colleagues at Finance and Environment and Climate Change Canada, and our own team here, who just worked tirelessly to ensure that our system was well understood, that there would be, if you will, mutual recognition of our pricing systems and producing certificates. What is really important is a very old trade principle: most favored nation, but also national treatment. So the whole objective is that a Canadian product not be treated any differently than a Czech piece of aluminum, or a piece of Polish or German steel. And that's really what we've been focused on.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very thorough answer, and Appreciate it. I did mention the deforestation question, but there was a question that came in directly after that one, and I don't know that you can elaborate very much beyond what you've said already, but it refers to the lack of carbon pricing in the United States. Is there any, do you want to tack on a couple of sentences to talk about Canada's situation as far as that goes, or is that a little outside of your scope?
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing to recognize there is that different nations will have different systems.
Yeah.
And I talked about systems friction. And one of those is that, US exporters to the EU will now have to start paying a carbon price to land their goods that I described. It's not all products, but the ones that I described in the EU. And so, again, this is a little bit about Anu Bradford's book, The Brussels Effect. It's like, even though you don't have a carbon price in the United States, if you want to export to the EU, you now have to do all the measuring. You have to produce all of the certification and have that third party audited in order to export. And it's the same in China. And so that is engendering a lot of conversation about measurement tools, how the carbon audits will work. And I think it's also why the EU has given quite a transition period into 2026 for the coming into force of these measures. I think what I'll just share here is that the EU is committed in this space. They're also working with their sectors and industry associations to understand how that transition will work here. And I think Canada is very well placed in order to, as I say, continue to have an effective dialogue and make sure it's understood how we are doing business back home. And then it'll be, of course, up to individual firms to decide where they see the competitive advantage for their products. Is that the US? Is that the EU, Latin America, Asia, etc.? Of course, as the former Chief Trade Commissioner of Canada, I love it when people say all of the above. And they're exporting to multiple markets. But again, I'll leave it there, Bill. This has really got to be an individual enterprise decision. Where can you land the price and the profits that are needed to keep reinvesting in your business? And that's an individual firm decision.
Thank you very much for addressing that. Yeah, a very useful extension. So back to deforestation. Yes, it's not it's a topic that concerns us all, but many of us won't know the EU's regulations in this area. Do you want to just give us a quick capsule on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of principles here, and the EU is particularly focused on the deforestation that has been occurring globally in specific crops, such as soy writ large. Globally. And I think for Canada, the really important thing and Canadian producers is to understand that we have an incredibly robust system to prevent deforestation, and it's how we report. I think some of the initial questions and work with the EU, because we're very aligned on the prevention of deforestation, ensuring technical assistance globally to nations whose smallholders and farmers are also working on these issues. Some of it was initially because the EU itself was having, a debate about how it would define what was needed in order to meet various requirements under their new pieces of regulation. And so that's been, again, a good conversation to understand how we manage our incredibly large forests. I think one thing that always surprises Europeans about Canada is the scale of our businesses, the scale of our farms, the scale of our forestry practices, and also, of course, ensuring that Indigenous owned logging businesses and their practices are also very well understood. So it continues to be a piece of work globally addressing biodiversity that we will continue to work on. So it has a bilateral element as well as our global work, where Canada hosted, as you know, co-hosted the biodiversity convention work last year in Montreal. And that was, again, an opportunity to bring Europeans through some of our practices. And we will continue to work together. I think the EU has shared with me, a lot of their focus it is also preventing deforestation in specific ecosystems, where again Canada has good bilateral relations, and I think that's another opportunity for cooperation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. I'm going to now go to a question about military. And the question is very straightforwardly about what our European partners are doing to expand their industrial capability when it comes to weapons and munitions. I'm going to piggyback, and I hope this isn't awkward, but we had a very interesting session at the CD Howe Institute yesterday on critical minerals. And the reason I think of trying to piggyback this is that looking at critical minerals development, there is such a heavy defense component. And that's natural and nothing surprising about it. But whenever defense gets into the mix, industrial policy and trade protectionism kind of lurk in the background for reasons that you know better than I. So apologies if to the questioner if I kind of grafted that on inelegantly. Ailish, it gives you a bit of a broader canvas.
And so the question is really about defense supply chains and industrial policy, Bill, or what would you?
Well, out of courtesy to the questioner just asked, do you see our European partners taking steps to expand their military industrial capabilities? To which the answer is yes, sort of implications for Canada. And I thought I would tack that on in case it seemed relevant to you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the answer to that is yes, absolutely. And for very good reason, because I think the actual physical threat to European security, it's constant and present here. And of course, we're also closer to Ukrainians that are coming out of the front lines with injuries, horrific injuries, and needing treatment, everything from amputations to dental help, prosthetic limbs. So I mean, it's just much more apparent, if you will, that there is an active illegal war going on here in Europe than back home in Canada, where of course there's an incredibly active Ukrainian Canadian community, and of course I think the news is always quite visible, but there's so many Ukrainians coming in and out, including men who've been given leave to come and visit their families who are sheltering, for example, in the Czech Republic, and it's just incredibly vivid here, and the opportunity, if we want to frame it that way, is really to ensure our mutual security through NATO, through the training of the Ukraine military. And I think there's many avenues for actual supply chain cooperation. And I think one of the ones that's really struck me most vividly is actually in IT and cybersecurity, because there is active Russian attempts to take down energy grids, to hack into systems, to compromise government related services constantly. And Canadian strengths in cybersecurity, including enterprise solutions, are very well known. So we think that's an incredibly strong area. Canada has provided, of course, at various times, Leopard 2 tanks, various forms of ammunition, and various other material, bullets, etc. And so as we continue to look at what our national interests are, in many cases, those are going to dovetail with the EU. We want to make sure that operating and maintenance of these systems is also, it's not just the upfront approvisionnement, the upfront procurement, but it's the ongoing maintenance of these systems. And Canada has a lot of strengths in avionics. Drone technology is another area where we see a lot of strength. And because of our vast territory, again, some of these unmanned aerial systems, as they're being developed, they cover our national interests, but they're also incredible opportunities for cooperation with our allies, our NATO partners.
Thank you very much for that. Very helpful to get that perspective. So I'm going to switch gears completely, but when you were talking, in case I had needed questions, which I don't, we're getting lots from our audience, but I did immediately write down the Brexit issue. such a
Yeah.
key trading partner for Canada historically. And as you remarked, one less state in the EU. We have a question about the absence of the UK from the EU and how that affects our dynamics with the EU. So again, a rather large canvas for you to paint on.
Yeah, you got it. Listen, that was a democratic moment, a decision by the people of the UK. And I think, it was very clear, obviously, that, Canada had and has, just an incredibly important relationship with the United Kingdom. And when the United Kingdom was in the EU, I mean, I think we've benefited tremendously from their voice and their activism here. And the UK was a real beachhead for many Canadian enterprises into the EU. It was a headquarter destination, of choice. And now I think the biggest impact for Canada has been to continue to maintain that really effective, capital markets, financial services, innovation partnership with the UK, which remains incredibly strong, and realize that it's not part of the single European market in the same way it was when it was a member. And so we've seen some headquarters functions moving. Ireland is the only official English speaking country that's now left in the EU, but of course English remains the dominant language of commerce in the EU, along with French. And so it's been interesting to see how different companies have adjusted, either moving on to the continent, some moves to Dublin. And I think it's really also highlighted, though, the depths of the relationships that maybe, we weren't as necessarily focused on previously. And it's been really interesting to see. I'll just say maybe three different, areas. Obviously, the incredibly strong supply chain, innovation, and capital markets linkages amongst the Francophonie, which includes the Benelux, France, and extends, of course, across Canada, but is particularly focused in Quebec. That has been an incredibly strong part of the relationship. A really strengthened understanding of Germany and the Germany as the economic engine of the entire European continent, but also the supply chain related effects. We've seen so many great Canadian companies that are part of German supply chains, that when the Eastern European enlargement of the EU occurred, to the Czech Republic, to Poland, and others, that those Canadian companies moved with their German OEMs. And so that's been a really interesting dynamic. And I was just in Poland last year, looking at some of those Eastern European supply chains that remain very strong. And then we just had Prime Minister Maloney in Canada, and that kind of southern aspect to things has also again had to strengthen, because we can't just rely on the UK to carry our water inside of the EU discussions. We've got to work harder to understand regional dimensions, to understand all 27 member states. And I promised only a few points, but of course, what I found is really natural synergies, I would say, in terms of our outlook on strategic autonomy and on open markets with the Dutch, with the Scandinavians. So we have a lot more strengths than we realize. Of course, I remind the Europeans all the time. I was just meeting with the Greek ambassador last week, and we were talking about an issue, and I said, well, of course we have an incredibly deep dialogue, because, Canada has the world. Every ethnicity, language, and community, is in Toronto, is in Vancouver, is in Montreal. And that gives us an incredible advantage. We know how the world thinks. We speak multiple languages, makes us very comfortable in the EU, because we have already, a multilingual federal system. So I'll leave it there. It's just, to my mind, maybe it's a project, maybe it's some homework we can give our children's generation. What might the EU look like if a future UK government was to hold another referendum? That's a really interesting question. But I maintain a great relationship as well with my UK counterpart. I saw him just this week, and I shouldn't, because this is public, so everyone's going to know my secret sauce, which is I keep my eye on everything that the best, closest partners are working on with the EU, Norway, the UK, and everything they're doing. Trust me, our incredible team here based in Brussels, our trade team, our ag team, our foreign policy team, we're always taking lessons from the best, closest partners, and we see no reason why Canada can't keep pace and be, again, a partner par excellence, along with even those closer geographically partners like the UK and Norway. So we'll keep at it. The
Well,
UK, everything you're doing, we're watching.
well, very good. Now we had to at least suspend. I'm not sure what the right term is. Our trade talks with the UK because we wouldn't yield on supply management. So there's still something that we can work on there. I'm not asking you to defend it, but the next question was about agriculture, and
Yeah.
just asking you to expand a bit on agriculture as part of your remit and how we're dealing with that extraordinarily trade sensitive area.
Yeah, well, I want to recognize the work of course, our trade negotiator who uh, negotiated CETA, Steve Verheuel, and Steve and I, talk regularly about this, both the vision that brought us into the EU and where we're headed, and that is, of course, we took a very clear approach to the EU, and that included preserving supply management and using a tariff rate quota for some of those um, products. And the EU itself is trying to, I think, figure out a way, and I think this is an important frame for Canadians back home to understand how it can continue to provide a very high level, a very high quality of product to EU citizens, to bring in, I think, incredibly high value, high standard products like those from Canada. And it's really important. I tell the EU, it's one thing to say what you're against, but let's also make sure we all say what we're for. And I think those Canadian products are the kinds of things that the EU can feel, very confident about, and EU consumers can feel very confident about. The challenge will be that the EU has a very highly structured common agricultural policy, and it has worked for the members that are there now. As you may know, Bill, Ukraine became a potential candidate country, and negotiations are opening with Ukraine. Now, that could take many years, and that's up to the EU and Ukraine itself. But Ukraine is an incredibly agriculturally rich and productive nation. And so there's already beginning to be a dialogue around what that, potential future accession could look like. And I think there's a real set of concerns that have to be engaged on, including supply, the quality of supply, standards, and the broader frame here is, of course, continuing to ensure food security for the world. And so that's what I want us to be, as Canadian producers, focused on. Specific products, we have, I just encourage people to come through Brussels as part of your European tours, as you go and visit markets. We've had fantastic visits, where people really engage. We had a fantastic set of farm to farm, if you will, agriculture stakeholder engagements on everything from soil health to fertilizer use to water management on farms. And it was just incredibly productive, also because the technology that's being deployed here in Europe. They have much smaller farms, but they're also trying to manage them to be even more productive. And there's a lot of ag tech, and I'll leave it there, that I think we can be working on. And I see those kinds of innovations that we can bring to the EU as well. But, again, Canada's got an interoperable set of systems. The US, well, first and foremost, our own domestic market, where I know food prices and addressing food price inflation is a real priority for the government, as well as the US and Asian supply. So I just see a lot of opportunity, and specific products. As I say, I can only say they continue to do well here in Europe. but we have a much bigger opportunity that I think includes the emerging markets.
Well, thank you very much. It was not quite fair of me to start an editorial on supply management, but with any luck, our domestic policies will give those charged with representing Canada abroad a little bit more flexibility and some tools when it comes to trade negotiations. End of editorial. Ailish, that was great. There's one question that we have to close up because we've promised to let you and everyone else go at the bottom of the hour. But I will just mention that we had a question about what you do to promote European investment in Canada. Maybe we could ask you to come back sometime if you're willing to give us another hour and a half, because it's been very helpful to get your perspectives on this. I have to remind everybody that we have been on the record. Just in case you were expecting the normal CD Houndstooth practice to prevail. My colleagues in events like to do some promotion, and I'm not sure, Addie, if you're able to whip up a slide in time. There you go. That's something a little bit different. And I think we're also, we got a tax session coming up as well. So a little bit of something for everyone. But Ailish, it has been tremendous to have you back on the stage at the CD Houndstooth. We appreciate your input. You handled a very wide range of topics with a lot of incisiveness and insight. If we were together in the room, as we hope we will be again one day, you'd hear a round of applause in person. As it is, I will mime, and you can imagine the rest of the group joining in. Thanks very much.
Thank you to you, Bill. Thanks to your whole team, and thanks to everyone here in Brussels, Chris O'Toole and Karen Kennedy, and everyone who helped me prepare as well. Thanks again.
Please give them our compliments. It was a great show.
Thanks.
That's it, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're done.